Nexus today, we're looking at the extraordinary life of O.J. Simpson, who died last week, aged 76. He went from being an all-American sports star to a double murder suspect when his ex-wife and her young friend were stabbed to death in 1994. In a moment, we'll hear from his lawyer handling his estate and one of his defense attorneys during his murder trial. But first, a quick reminder of the trial of the century.
O.J. Simpson, in a knit cap from 2 blocks away, is still O.J. Simpson. It's no disguise. It's no disguise. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. You must acquit.
In a trial full of dramatic moments, that one is surely one of the most memorable. O.J.'s defense attorney, Johnny Cochran, raising doubt in the minds of the jury. Their verdict, which was watched by 150 million Americans, stunned the nation.
Mr. Simpson, would you please stand and face the jury?
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
Many couldn't believe it. They had watched the trial on TV and saw prosecutors present forensic evidence that O.J. Simpson had murdered Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Rond Goldman.
The mere fact that we find blood where there should be no blood, in the defendant's car, in his house, in the driveway, and even on the socks in his very bedroom, at the foot of his bed, that trail of blood from Bundy through his own Ford Bronco and into his house in Rockingham is devastating proof of his guilt.
Prosecutors had also played a harrowing recording of O.J.'s ex-wife calling the police a couple of years prior.
What does he look like?
He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his record. Could you just send somebody over here? You're going to hear him in a minute. He's about to come in again.
Okay, just stay on the line.
I don't want to stay on the line. He's going to beat the
Wait a minute.
The officer who responded to the emergency call testified that O.J. had beaten her, and the jury was shown photographic evidence.
A woman came running out of the bushes to my left, crossed the driveway, and started yelling, "He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me."
The prosecution then believed they had a compelling case, but they were going up against O.J.'s defense team, which was one of the best that money could buy. Led by Robert Shapiro, it comprised Robert Kardashian, Alan Dershowitz, Johnny Cochran, and Robert Glazier. The press dubbed them the Dream Team, and in the so-called trial of the century, they outgunned the prosecution. In one of the longest trials in Californian history, lasting 11 months, the defense steadily chipped away at the prosecution's case, starting with the DNA evidence, which they argued had been tampered with and was not reliable.
The fact that blood mysteriously appears on vital pieces of evidence, and it's predicted what the results will be regarding DNA when that evidence is still in the police lab, is devastating evidence of something far more sinister.
They also argued that Detective Mark Furman, who found the bloody glove at O.J. Simpson's house, had planted it there because he was a racist. Witnesses for the defense testified he'd used the N-word many times in the past. Furman lied in court and denied it.
Do you use the word in describing people?
No, sir.
The defense later presented audio tapes of Furman using the N-word many times a few years before the trial. His credibility was shot. They also successfully portrayed the LA police as systemically racist, and some jurors were ready to believe this given the recent events. There had been race riots in the city just 2 years earlier, in 1992, after the policemen who were filmed beating Rodney King were cleared by a court of using excessive force. In the O.J. Simpson trial, the vast majority of jurors were black, and at the time they said they'd reached a not guilty verdict because the prosecution's case was weak. But years later, at least one juror admitted race had played a part.
Do you think that they're members of the jury that voted to acquit O.J. because of Rodney King?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
How many of you think felt that way?
Oh, probably 90% of them.
That was payback.
Uh-huh.
You think that's right?
The racial divide was abundantly clear on the Oprah Winfrey Show, as her studio audience watched live as the O.J. verdict came in.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation.
Black women overwhelmingly cheered. White women were horrified. A couple of black women in the audience did feel the same way. A survey at the time revealed this racial divide was real. After Simpson was acquitted, 69% of white Americans said they believed he was probably or definitely guilty. Just 16% of black Americans felt the same way. In his first interview after the not guilty verdict, O.J. Simpson was confronted with a simple fact.
The truth is that in the minds of millions of people around the world, you killed Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. They believe that. That's their perception. And because you had a lot of money and you had some innovative lawyers, you're going to get away with it. Can you live with that public perception in the minds of some people?
Well, I don't think doing this tape is going to change a lot of minds. Basically, I think the people who have had faith in me and believed in me, hopefully I'll justify that.
Thanks. I'm Norm Macdonald, and this is the Fake News.
America's top satirist at the time, Norm Macdonald, ridiculed Simpson's protestations of innocence and was eventually fired from Saturday Night Live for making jokes like this.
In his book, O.J. Simpson says that he would have taken a bullet or stood in front of a train for Nicole. Man, I'm going to tell you, that is some bad luck when the one guy who would have died for you kills you. That's probably...
A year after the murder trial, O.J. Simpson was on trial again, in a civil case brought by Nicole and Ron's families. This time he was found liable for their deaths and ordered to pay $33 million in compensation and damages.
We finally have justice for Ron and Nicole.
A decade later, O.J. Simpson and his ghostwriter published If I Did It, a supposedly hypothetical account of the murders, but no confession. He filmed an interview to boost sales.
And it concerns the murders of my ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her young friend, Ronald Goldman.
O.J. stood to make a lot of money from the book, but a court stepped in, awarding the book rights to the Goldman family, in part to satisfy the ruling in the civil case. In 2008, exactly 13 years to the day after his acquittal, O.J. Simpson was found guilty of robbing a casino in an attempt to get back his old trophies. He spent the next 9 years in prison and was released a worn-out 70-year-old. O.J. spent the last 7 years of his life a free man, but in relative obscurity. He released this final video message back in February.
Hey, X-World, it's me, yours truly. Boy, what a beautiful day it is. My health is good. I mean, obviously I'm dealing with some issues, but hey, I think I'm just about over it, and I'll be back on that golf course, hopefully in a couple of weeks.
O.J. Simpson died from his prostate cancer just 2 months later, apparently surrounded by all his children and grandchildren.
Hospice? You talking about hospice? No, I'm not in any hospital. I don't know who put that out there, but whoever put that out there, I guess is like the Donald saying, can't trust the media.
Let's bring in our panel now, and Robert Glazier defended O.J. Simpson during his murder trial. Malcolm Laverne has been O.J.'s lawyer for the past 7 years and is the executor of his estate. And finally, we have Nexus regular Vinoo, who's a criminal defence attorney and a former prosecutor. Welcome to the programme, everyone. Robert Glazier, if I may start with you. Even after all these years, Robert, people still want to know how O.J. Simpson got away with murder. That's their phrasing of it, not me. Can you tell me how you and your team won that trial?
Well, there were many factors that played into it. I mean, my responsibility was with all the forensic evidence, and I think we were able to raise reasonable doubt about that. But you've also got the issues with the gloves and Mark Furman's racism, and that combined all together to lead to the jury verdict. And I think a lot of it is also due to the way Marcia Clark picked the jury. The case was held in Los Angeles rather than Santa Monica, where the actual crimes were committed. And we wound up with a very positive jury for our side. I mean, all of these factors mixed together resulted in a very quick verdict, an unusually quick verdict. in the case.
If the prosecutor had been more competent, at the top of their game, as your defense team was, is it likely that O.J. Simpson would have been found guilty and spent the rest of his life in prison?
I think that was a strong likelihood, quite frankly. If the case had been tried in Santa Monica, I think he would have been found guilty. There was just a lot of forensic evidence, and we did our best to try to cast doubt on a lot of that, and we were able to do that in Los Angeles. But had it been Santa Monica, I don't think we would have been able to do it.
And it was the prosecution's choice to not try him in Santa Monica, which is a much more white area, which would have meant that the jury would have been much whiter and he would have gone down. Why would they choose that? Why would they make that decision? It seems crazy.
Well, according to them anyway, they felt that because of security concerns, they knew this was going to be a huge trial. And because of security concerns, they wanted it downtown where they could kind of stay close to the central part of the town rather than going out to Santa Monica. I think that was a mistake, quite frankly. I mean, when we did the civil case, we did it in Santa Monica, which was a big mistake for us.
Well, because he was found unanimously to be liable for their deaths in that case. We'll come to that a little later, but let's go back to the prosecutor, Marcia Clark. So not only did she decide for the prosecution, the trial to happen downtown LA, where there would be a much more greater chance of having a black jury, not only that, she actually expressed a preference for black women to be on the jury. Again, why?
That's my understanding. I think she did a totally miscalculation in terms of the racial issue, and I've learned. I never talked to her about it, but I've learned that she wanted to have elderly black women on the jury because she thought that would be more sympathetic to the victims. It turned out to be a huge mistake, and you just can't ignore the racial component of the case. It's there. It's not something that we raised. It's just there.
The black jurors at the time told the press that they were concerned about evidence tampering and about the racist police. But later, in the last couple of years, one or two jurors have come out and said, no, actually, it was in revenge for what happened to Rodney King. What do you think was really their motivation for their verdict?
Well, I'm not sure that the Rodney King case really had that much effect on our jury. I think our jury was impressed by the job we did defending O.J. And the poor job that the prosecution did. I just don't think the Rodney King thing was a big factor. I mean, it was something that had happened a few years before, and but I think it was systemic racism of the Los Angeles Police Department was a big factor in it as well.
What's interesting about you, Robert, is that you're the only lawyer to have won and lost an O.J. Simpson case. So you defended him, you were part of the team that defended him in the criminal trial in '95, and then the following year, you went to trial again with him in a civil trial brought by the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, and you lost that. Why was there that difference?
Oh, well, a big factor of that was the venue being in Santa Monica rather than downtown L.A. Plus, the people did not like O.J. at all. We had a predominantly white jury. He had to testify. That was a big factor as well, because we had convinced him not to testify in the criminal case, which was his right. But in the civil case, he didn't have a choice. So we knew that he was not a good witness for himself, just because of the domestic violence issues that came up in both cases. So it was it was we pretty much knew we were going to lose the case in the civil case, and I actually told OJ before the civil case started. I said, why don't you just default and let the jury, let the judge decide what the penalty is, and go with that, rather than having a lengthy trial. And he decided against that.
Why did he decide against it?
Well, he was so adamant that he was totally innocent of the homicides, and he has a very strong ego. He's a great guy. He's a very nice man, but he's got a very strong ego, and I think he felt like he needed to prove something.
Did he feel like he'd got away with it once? He'd want to get away with it in a civil trial too?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I would say that he was so convinced of his own innocence that he wanted that to be presented to everybody else. And, that's why he took the posture he did. I don't think it was, what you said.
So he was acquitted in the criminal trial, but he was found liable in the civil trial. What does that mean, liable?
It just means when you have a civil trial, you're talking about damages. You're not talking about putting somebody in jail, and there's a lower burden of proof. You only have to prove 51% of the evidence in favor of the plaintiff. So, it's a whole different proceeding.
What was the question put to the jury, though? Do you find the defendant?
Well, it was basically the same thing as the criminal trial. Do you find that he was responsible for, and I don't remember the exact way it was phrased, but civil juries are given specific instructions in terms of a list of questions that they're asked, and then they respond and they assess a penalty.
Right. So the civil trial, the jury believed he did kill Nicole and Ron. And did he ever tell you, Robert, why he killed them?
Oh, he's always maintained his innocence. From when I got involved in the case until later. I mean, he's always maintained his innocence, and so I don't have any revelations about.
Understood. Malcolm, I'd like to come to you now. We can join up the two lawyers from the civil trial because you have been in the news, in the international news lately, for having said that the family of Ron Goldman, who filed and won that civil suit, will never receive a cent from O.J. Simpson's estate, even though the court ordered him to pay millions. Would you like to just put the record straight on that? Have you changed your perspective on that?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you know by now that was basically me talking for two reasons. Number one, still kind of talking as Mr. Simpson's attorney in an adversarial environment. But the attorney hat has come off now, and the executor hat has come on. So that's one reason for the backtracking. The second reason is, after analyzing Fred Goldman's statements directly, Fred Goldman didn't make any offensive statements after Mr. Simpson passed away. The statements I was responding to were one of his debt collection attorney in California. But I was fascinated with your conversation with Mr. Glazier, because that is the only time I've ever asked O.J. a pointed question about the 1990s is, why didn't he default? I literally asked him that question. That's the only question I ever asked him about the LA thing.
And did he tell you the same thing, did he, that he was convinced of his innocence?
Basically along those lines, and also he wanted to start doing asset protection too. He wanted to give himself enough time to do asset protection as well. So I am fascinated that that was, because why give them the satisfaction of finding you liable? Just default, and you can still just kind of say, hey, you know what? I defaulted, and do what you see people in the news in the United States doing now. Like, hey, it's still not my fault. It's just a corrupt system.
As the executor of his estate, people will no doubt be queuing up to ask you, how much did he leave behind?
That is my job, and I am pursuing it at a lightning pace by executor standards. Mr. Simpson just died last Wednesday, and here we are on Wednesday. I've done a couple of sweeps of his home. I've gotten some information on bank accounts, IRS debt, Social Security. All that stuff will come in, but his estate is worth what any person's estate is worth, essentially. And then household furnishings, TVs, golf clubs. that kind of stuff. So I've got to just tabulate that up, and that's my job. It just began, but it's going to be done at a much faster pace than most people do it.
No doubt you are in touch with his family, and it must be a sad time for them. When they released a statement, they said that, our father had, died with his children and grandchildren around him. A lot of people would be curious to know if his children with Nicole were there when he died, or with him when he was dying at the end there.
Yeah, everyone's curious about the two youngest. The two oldest two. He has 4 surviving children, and yes, from the time that Mr. Simpson started transitioning on April the 5th, this 2 Fridays ago, to the time he passed, he was in contact, and all of his family members, grandchildren, friends, me, everyone was there, by his side. And what I say by his side, just during that last time, at the actual moment he passed away. That's a technical issue, but family members were still there in the house present.
Are we to understand from that their shared children, OJ and Nicole, their shared children, do not believe their father killed their mother?
Never had that conversation with them about that. And I will say this, they are private figures in the United States. That's a term. They're private. They've always remained private. They've never publicly spoken about this. And so I'd rather anything that I've done with them at this point just kind of remain private, but I can just give you that much, that they've never spoken on this issue.
Back in February, he posted a couple of videos in which he said, I'm looking forward to getting back out on the golf course and so on. Did he genuinely believe he was going to live on, or was he just putting a brave face on it?
Oh, no, he definitely believed that. I was in communication with him consistently at that time. He got cancer several years ago, and thought he had beaten it. And he was very upbeat about it. And then cancers go. Sometimes they return. But he was getting the best treatments, experimental, trial. And so at that moment in time, he was not on hospice. He was actually feeling quite well. But he was in and out of the hospital. And when you're his age, closing in on 80, the treatments for cancer give you other issues, and then you have other issues. So it's a complicated affair, but he was not on hospice at that time, and I and everyone around him believed that he was going to make a comeback.
Right. Vinoo Varghese, this case 30 years ago, you were just getting into law then, or just thinking about getting into law. How big is it in the canon of legal cases?
I mean, it's considered one of the trials of the century. I was immediately post-college working for a couple of years before law school. I worked in social services up in East Harlem, and the trial was on every day. And for me, it's a thrill to be on a panel with Mr. Glazier, Robert Glazier, one of Mr. Simpson's, O.J. Simpson's dream team. And, it was something that I'll never forget. Everyone, in my generation was shaped by the OJ trial, especially those of us that went to law school. And it was fascinating as I'm not black, I'm not white, I'm brown. And in this country, to this day, it's still black and white in terms of speaking about race. But as a non-black, white person, seeing the reactions. I mean, there are these clips of when the verdict was announced in Times Square, and you had a white man sitting next to a black woman, and the difference in reaction of that, sticks on forever in my memory. And it was definitely talked about in law school. And I think Mr. Glazier, Robert Glazier, is being a bit humble. I mean, he said something that I thought was important, which is that they introduced reasonable doubt. And so looking at it and analyzing the case, in my view, there was reasonable doubt. And there is often reasonable doubt in criminal cases. What they did was extraordinary. They were able to get an acquittal. So while other factors played, an important part, the racial makeup of the jury, in my view, there was absolute reasonable doubt introduced by these lawyers, his team, Mr. Dershowitz, and others. And I think that stuff, I mean, if the glove don't quit, you must acquit, has become part of American, lore. So I think there's a lot of things. Unfortunately, it sparked a backlash. And I think that what happened is that criminal defendants have not gotten a fair shake because there's a lot of this OJ hangover of the fact that, most people believe that a guilty man went free. And, American jurisprudence is based on the idea that better that 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man go to jail. Most Americans don't believe that. They don't want to see any guilty man go to jail. And I think any guilty man go free. They'd rather 10 innocent people go to jail than one guilty man go free. And I think that's the unfortunate hangover of the O.J. Simpson case.
Yeah. Robert, just a final question for you then. Yes, justice was done in the sense that the racist, cops, the alleged tampering with evidence and so on, destroyed the case. And so justice was served, technically, but morally, Robert?
Oh, I think so. I think there was reasonable doubt. There was no question about that. Yeah. So, no, I think justice was done. I think it was a good result, not just as one of his defense attorneys, but as a public citizen.
Well, Robert, most people wouldn't agree with you, but then most people weren't in the dream team. Robert Glazier, Malcolm Laverne, and Vinoo Varghese, thank you all very much for your contributions today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.